Good morning. My name is Stephanie Davenport, and I'm joined by my co-leader, Lauren Heck. We are Southeastern Regional Leads for the HBA Women in Health Give Back Amplify Your Impact Initiative. Today, we're joined by Maria Reinman, Executive Director of WomenNC, which is an organization focused on understanding gender disparities and advocating for change.
Good morning, everyone. We're so grateful that you are being so gracious with your time and providing some content for an upcoming conference. Maria, I want to start with you. If you could just tell us a little bit more about WomenNC, specifically if you could share with us some information about the leadership program that you have.
Sure, absolutely. So WomenNC is a 13-year-old community-based nonprofit, and our oldest, and I would say most important program that we have is a leadership training program where we work with undergraduates from universities, from colleges and universities, to investigate instances of gender disparity across the state. We pair our undergraduate scholars up with what we call femtors, not mentors. And these are social science researchers from RTI International's Global Gender Center. And together in dyads, the undergraduate student and the researcher, as I said, investigate specific instances of gender disparity using social science research methods. And then after the research is done, and here's what pulls at my heartstrings, students develop short-term, low-cost public policy solutions to move the needle forward, to improve the status quo. And then part 3 of this program is to advocate for these policy solutions in front of change makers. Sometimes that's city councils, sometimes that's school boards or county commissioners. In other words, this is a research project put into action. You can see it floats my boat. It is an important program that trains young leaders to improve the lives of women and girls.
So we're also joined today by Bridget Pittman Blackwell. And I understand, Bridget, that you were a part of the leadership training program. So can you tell us a little bit about the leadership training program? And I understand now that you even work for WomenNC, and tell us how your efforts can make the program better.
Absolutely. So first, let me say thank you so much for having us today. I will start off answering the questions. The leadership training program, that is really one of the pivotal pieces to WomenNC. As a scholar, I was in the cohort 2019-2020, and my research that I looked at, it addressed dress code policies influencing body shame, sexualization, and the learning environment of African-American middle school girls. And so when I was working with WomenNC as a scholar, it was important because I got to see that the work was being done even before I arrived. When I was doing my research on WomenNC, I looked at all of the scholars who had participated before me, and it was amazing to see all of the topics and areas that they had covered with their research. And this happens yearly, and it was so impactful. And by me seeing this, I knew I had something to gain as a scholar being a part of the program. And, my expectations were met. And so being able to come back 2 years later and actually be staff and work with WomenNC as the program and engagement manager, my role is essentially support and making sure that the scholars are successful as they're matriculating through the program. So that looks like hands-on support, helping them with their research projects as they're creating them and drafting them. As they're moving along through the program, my role is making sure they have that support and, that one-on-one contact, that face-to-face where, as you're doing research, you're not alone. So it is definitely a kind of a full circle moment to be a part of WomenNC as a scholar, but now to be back working as staff is definitely full circle.
Oh, outstanding.
Thank you, Bridget, for sharing that with us. And Manisha, I want to turn to you. You've been working as a femtor for about 3 years now. So if you can spend some time just telling us, why you're pursuing this, what you get out of it, but also what that you hope the scholars will get out of working with you.
Yes. Firstly, I also want to echo my gratitude for being here today. This is a very unique opportunity. I also love talking about WomenNC specifically, as well as the Scholars Program. So Maria, definitely in tune with you and tugging at my heartstrings too. This is my third year femtouring. I actually got involved as sort of a, I guess, sideliner 4 years ago when I was able to watch the culmination of WomenNC scholars presenting their research. And I just knew immediately that this is something I wanted to get involved in as a femtour. And I remember that very evening pulling Dr. Wendy Wexberg aside and saying, how do I get involved? Sign me up right now for next year. It is something that I feel like, even though there's this, femtourship process where I'm supposed to be the femtour and I'm teaching, I also think it is such a learning opportunity for me. I've learned something each year that I have been a part of the program, and I really just hope what the scholars gain from it is that they feel supported in what I like to believe is a sisterhood that extends beyond just the 1 year of research. It's really important for women to feel supported and for the scholars to have that at such a unique time in their lives while they're in college. It's so great to be a part of that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank
It sounds
you.
like an awesome experience. So I now have a question for each of you. So for all the panelists, we'll start with Bridget, and then we'll go to Manisha, and then Maria will have you close it out. So why is gender equity important to you? And what do you think we can do to eliminate gender inequities?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question because, it brings light to issues surrounding gender inequity. And, I think a huge reason of why it is important in our society today, I think a lot of issues are being highlighted and are kind of in our face, and especially with social media and the news, you can't really escape everything that's happening, unless you turn your TV off or you're not looking at your computer. There's always something that can be done because there's always work to be done. And that's the really important thing with issues surrounding gender inequity. Even if you are not female, even if you do not identify as female, there is still something that you can be doing. There are so many different issues that we can address. So there's so many different areas that you can work on. You can find something that you're passionate about and really hammer it home, and, doing your research and listening to what is coming out, what is important today, what really needs our attention, and what we can be paying attention to. There's always, and it's not really something that we can overlook. And, it can be difficult and heavy at times, but I think that is, also a positive to it, that it's so in our face at this current point in time. There's always something that can be done. So that's really one of the reasons why, gender inequity and the work in gender, there's areas that we can find our passions about and do that work.
Great. Manisha, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think to me, this work exists because the problem still exists. So if there was equal rights for all genders, then we wouldn't be having this conversation very likely. So I think in terms of what we can do, just to pivot from that point, I think having conversations like this are steps in the right direction. We can't just put our fingers in our ears and pretend like the problems will go away, because they don't. They get worse. We've seen over the last few years just how important it is to give women equal rights in the workplace, especially. And, again, the conversations are a good start, but we need to build off that conversation and take some action as well.
Great. And what kind of actions can we take? And, as far as actions, what can we do?
So I think one actionable step that each one of us are capable of doing is researching it and paying attention to what the numbers say.
Mhm.
So not just believing everything that you hear or read on social media is really great, but it's also really dangerous and a slippery slope in terms of what it sometimes can project and say and make people believe. Take the time to actually research and read and pay attention to the data that's out there. So that's one actionable step that each of us can take right now.
Great. Thank you. So now to Maria.
Well, let me follow up on what Manisha has said. And our belief at WomenNC is that real change has to come from a place of fact and knowledge.
Mhm.
Leadership, correctly understood, comes from a place of fact and knowledge. And that's what our leadership training program provides our scholars, is the ability to engage and investigate with a very specific problem in a very particular community. Understand it well, not just journalistically, but understand the specific problem well. As Bridget spoke about her work in Durham, North Carolina, about dress code policies across the district in middle schools. You see how specific that is? It allowed Bridget to gain real insight into a problem that she had some ideas about going into her work as a scholar. And as she came out of it, a deeper understanding based on fact and knowledge. And it allowed her then to think through, well, now that I understand the problem, what am I going to do about it? And that, I think, is the beauty of what WomenNC does in this scholars program. It's not like sitting in a seminar in college, valuable as those things are. The papers, the research that the scholars do does not sit on a metaphorical shelf and gather dust and receive the A. It is used to engage policymakers and say, I've got a plan. Let me explain the problem to you, and don't despair. There are things, there are actions that we can take to improve the status quo. So I just wanted to underscore that it's one of the beauties of the program. There's a kind of efficacy built into the project so that not only do women in North Carolina, the specific community that's been investigated, benefit, but the scholar herself, and there have been men in the past, not too many, but as I think Bridget said earlier, all need to be concerned about gender equity. But the scholar herself or himself feels efficacious because not always are public policy solutions enacted into law, but they are heard by those who then have a deeper understanding of what might be done. And so it's a program that's both good for the whole and good for the individual scholar. And it's something that we at WomenNC are really, really proud of. So I don't know, does that kind of address what you were looking for, Stephanie?
Yes, it definitely does. It sounds like the program has been very successful. And I would just want to do one last follow-up question. What successes have you seen come out of the program?
Well, I will point, and then I'll let Manisha and Bridget come. One that really sticks out for me, and it's not with someone who's in the, on this call right now, but several years ago, we had a scholar who really kind of, wondered, why is it that in Research Triangle Park area, which is where we're located in Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, that's the Research Triangle Park, known for lots of high tech, lots of very lucrative and prestigious jobs. Why were there so few women in these lucrative, prestigious jobs? That was what spurred her. She then said, well, one big way to get into this is computer science majors often get some of these jobs. Well, then she took another step back and said, there's not too many women computer science graduates. I wonder why that's the case. So she did some more investigation, and that she looked at Durham, North Carolina particularly, and said, that's because I'm told that most women who come into computer science at the undergraduate level don't have the AP, the advanced placement exam in computer science. And so they spend a lot of time doing sort of not necessarily remedial, but sort of low level work. So it doesn't really allow them to major in computer science. She took another step back and said, well, why aren't women in high school taking AP computer science classes? She talked to high school computer science teachers in Durham public schools. And what she found is that at the beginning level, women and men, young women and men in high schools take computer science at equal levels or just about equal levels. But at the advanced levels, women drop out. And so she said, I wonder why that's the case. And here's the brilliance. She said, I don't know. But you know who might know? Are these very same computer science teachers in high schools across the district. They need to figure that out. They don't know either. How could they figure it out? Well, for those of you who have children, at least in some districts in North Carolina, they're called, teachers get release time to speak across disciplines, to have conversations with their colleagues. And computer science teachers in Durham didn't have that release time. And so the policy solution that our scholar suggested was, and she knocked, this is before COVID, she knocked on the door of the superintendent of Durham Public Schools and said, do you think once a month you could give some release time to these teachers of high school computer science classes so they could figure out how to attract and retain more women and minorities in upper level computer science classes? And you know what the superintendent did? She said, yeah, I can do that. That's just a few bucks to give them a release time. And so now there are teachers in Durham Public Schools talking to each other, trying, among other things, I'm sure, how to attract and retain women and minorities in computer science classes, which then hopefully, remember the initial question was, why aren't women and minorities engaged in this high-paying, high-prestige work? She took it back and had a low-cost, short-term, although not really short-term, but certainly low-cost solution to improve the status quo. So that's one example of the kind of work we're doing here at WomenNC.
And that's outstanding, outstanding work. Yep, sounds like
Bridget,
a wonderful program benefiting a lot of people.
Bridget or Manisha, do you want to share some of the, I know Bridget, you shared a little bit about, your work with dress code, which is fascinating and so impactful and needed. And I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that or additional work you're aware of, as well as Manisha.
Absolutely. So I will tag onto this first and step back into my shoes as a scholar. The work that I did with WomenNC, it was one of my first experiences where I got to be in an all-female research group. And I take that with me, and I definitely do not take that for granted. And not to toot my own horn too loud, but our year, we had a lot of scholars who had a lot of great outcomes. And so just, speaking for myself with our year in 2020, when we were doing our presentations, it was COVID. So a lot of our stuff was virtual. So we were able to present with WomenNC at RTI at the Global Gender Center. We were able to present at NC State with the Durham Women's Commission. And because we did all of these presentations for myself, I got connected with RTI. And I was able to get an internship just from my presentation. And with that internship, working with Dr. Brian Southwell at RTI and Dr. Karen Keaton-Jackson at North Carolina Central University, I was able to finish that internship as a co-editor for a book that was published with RTI Press earlier this year. And, you know, just because of that research, that was my passion, that research, all of these different things came from it, and making connections and networking. And, you know, that's the type of scholars that WomenNC produces. And so, you know, as I'm having these conversations, maybe not directly about my research, but stuff that has come from my research, it's still putting the highlight and spotlight on WomenNC to show these are the type of scholars that we are producing. This is the work that we're doing, and this is what is coming from the work that is a passion of these scholars. So.
Bridget, one follow-up question, something I'm curious about is, have you seen any school districts or superintendents, principals, anyone, you know, adopting, you know, maybe making changes or adopting a new dress code based on the research and information you were able to provide?
Yes, so very interesting enough, Durham Public Schools this year, they actually were having conversations about updating their dress code policy. So I don't know specifically if my work had any impact, but I like to think it did at some way. At some point, it was in a room somewhere where I wasn't,
Yes.
but Durham Public Schools, they did update their dress code policies to a more inclusive version. And so that was one of the points of my research. I compared Durham Public Schools with public school systems in Portland, Oregon, which was a more inclusive dress code model. And so Durham Public Schools, DPS, they're following that same model now.
Awesome. That's awesome. Manisha, what about you? Is there things that you could share with us as far as successes?
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, the entire program is such a success. Maria's anecdote about the scholar who, you know, made some strides in computer science field and STEM education for high school students is always one that stands out in my mind as well. I like to think that the scholars on some level or another plant the seeds. And so we don't always necessarily see the fruit that same, you know, presentation or that same year. But I do think the conversations are happening on a much local and even global level where they weren't probably happening before. So they're really great seed planters. And I think Bridget is an excellent success story to tell. You know, it's come full circle for her work now at WomenNC specifically. We also have a scholar from Bridget's cohort, I believe, who now works at the Global Gender Center full-time as well. And so it's really nice to see that the research that they've done for one full year motivates them to continue to want to work in these fields too, because that's what we really need. We need more people working in this field. It doesn't necessarily have to be women, like Maria said. Men can work in this field too. In fact, it's really impactful and powerful when we have men working in gender equity research. And I think for me, the most, you know, the biggest success is really seeing the culmination of each scholar's project as they stand up and give their presentations to various audiences, whether it's at RTI International, NC State, you know, the UN Commission on Status of Women. I think each of them is able to sort of see something that they started as a conversation maybe with their femtor turn into something much more meaningful and bigger than what they probably even ever imagined. So that for me is the biggest success that I think about when I think of this program.
And if I could just jump in there really quickly, I think that's right. As we all know, public policy is a slow slog often. And it's not so often that you go in front of a state legislator or in front of a city council and they say, oh, great, yes, we'll do it tomorrow. I think the idea that Manisha talked about, planting a seed, is something that we see at WomenNC. We keep in touch with our alumni, and they continue, many of them, to work in the field of gender equity. Certainly not all of them, but even those who don't are often part of either volunteer work or groups within their for-profit organizations that are interested in empowering women. What we see is that seed has been planted. And so it's in some ways an overused metaphor, but it's an apt metaphor. Certainly we care that change is happening in Durham Public Schools. Certainly we care about that, but maybe even more important that we are creating cohorts of women who understand that knowledge and fact is an important element in leading, and that research as an important endeavor if we actually want to see change. And I think we do pretty well with that.
Well, this has been a wonderful, insightful conversation, and I just want to thank each of you for being with us today. I know that the Women Deliver Conference will definitely benefit from hearing the work that WomenNC is doing to eliminate gender inequities and just, push women forward.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much.